For 11 nights, I slept curled up on a freezing station bench, scrubbing toilets by day and guarding my backpack by night. On the 11th night, the loudspeaker called me to a locker paid for 20 years in advance. Inside was a note from a grandfather I was told had died long ago, warning that someone had stolen my life. Tonight, the departure board will not display a train schedule, but the name of the thief who took everything from me. My name is Freya Turner, and for the last 29 years, I have been training to be invisible. It is a skill that serves me well right now. Considering I am currently curled into a ball on a hard metal bench in the waiting area of Riverbridge Central Station, trying to look like a passenger who simply missed the last connection rather than a woman who has lost everything. I am 29 years old. I work the graveyard shift scrubbing the toilets and greasing the maintenance tracks of this very station, and as of 11 nights ago, I am also a resident here. The cold in Riverbridge is not just a temperature, it is a physical weight. It seeps through the glass walls of the concourse and settles into your marrow. During the day, this station is a cathedral of movement, a blur of commuters rushing toward the suburbs or the city center, their heels clicking a rhythm of purpose on the terrazzo floor. But at night, when the heavy iron gates roll down over the main entrances and the security guards retreat to their booths to watch episodes of sitcoms on their phones, the station breathes, it groans. The ventilation systems rattle like dying lungs, and the distant screech of freight trains switching tracks miles away vibrates through the floorboards directly into my spine. For these first 11 nights, I have perfected a routine. I clock out of my shift at 4 a.m, change out of my gray jumpsuit in the employee locker room, and then, instead of walking out the sliding doors to a bus stop, I loop back around to the passenger waiting area in Sector B. I always choose the bench directly beneath the primary security camera. It is the most uncomfortable spot, bathed in harsh fluorescent light that buzzes like an angry insect, but I figured if someone decides to slit my throat for the $12.40 in my pocket, I want it recorded in high definition. I sleep with my backpack looped through both arms and tucked under my head. It contains my entire life, 2 changes of clothes, a toothbrush, a half-eaten packet of crackers, and a folder of documents that prove I exist, even if the world seems intent on forgetting me. Sleep is a generous word for what happens on that bench. It is more like a series of long blinks interrupted by the automated voice of the station announcer. Even when no trains are running, the system glitches, occasionally reminding the empty hall to mind the gap or report suspicious packages. I am the suspicious package, I suppose, lying there, staring at the vaulted ceiling where pigeons roost in the iron trusses. I have plenty of time to think about how a person falls this far. It is rarely a sudden drop. It is a slow, grinding descent, like a train losing its brakes on a gentle slope. You do not realize you are crashing until you have already run out of track. My descent began years ago in Milford, a town that smelled of sawdust and disappointment. We lived in a small, drafty timber house that seemed to shrink every year. My mother, Elaine, was the gravitational center of that house, but I was never the planet she was trying to keep in orbit. That role belonged to Liam, my younger brother, Liam, with his bright eyes and his effortless charm, Liam, the star. I remember a specific dinner when I was 16. The kitchen was thick with the smell of meatloaf and the humidity of a summer storm brewing outside. Elaine and my stepfather, Dale, were leaning forward, their elbows on the sticky plastic tablecloth, watching Liam eat as if he were performing a magic trick. Liam had just received an A on a history essay. You would think he had negotiated a peace treaty. "This is it," Elaine said, her eyes shining in a way they never did when she looked at me. "Mr. Henderson said, you have a natural grasp of narrative. Liam, that is scholarship material. That is a ticket out of here." "I just wrote what he wanted to hear," Liam said through a mouthful of potatoes, feigning modesty but soaking up the adoration. "I set a record at the supermarket today," I said, my voice sounding too loud in the small room. "Scanned 20 items a minute for a 3-hour rush. Manager said he might put me on the closing shift permanently. That is 50 cents more an hour." The silence that followed was not hostile, it was indifferent, which was worse. Elaine did not even turn her head. She just reached over and wiped a smudge of gravy from Liam's chin. "That is nice, Freya," she said, her voice flat, devoid of any real engagement. "Eat before it gets cold. Liam, tell Dale about the debate team idea." That was my place in the universe. I was the background noise. I was the sturdy furniture. I was there to facilitate the comfort of the main characters. There was a photograph on the mantelpiece that summed up my entire childhood. It was in a cheap, faux gold frame that Elaine dusted religiously every Tuesday. In the photo, a younger Elaine was beaming, holding a toddler-aged Liam on her hip. They looked radiant, bathed in sunlight, and on the far left edge of the photo, there was a blurry shape. It was my left shoulder and half of my ear. The rest of me had been scissored off. "Why am I cut out?" I asked once, when I was old enough to realize that family photos usually included the whole family. Elaine had shrugged, adjusting the angle of the frame. "It did not fit the frame. Freya, do not be dramatic. It is just a picture." It was just a picture, but it was also a prophecy. I was only allowed in the frame if I did not take up space needed for Liam. Growing up, I learned that questions were dangerous things. Specifically, questions about where we came from. When I was 12, I came home from school with a family tree assignment. Other kids were talking about grandmothers who baked cookies and grandfathers who fought in wars. I had a blank space. "Do I have a grandpa?" I asked Elaine while she was folding laundry. "Everyone has a grandpa." She froze. The shirt in her hand stopped moving. When she turned to look at me, her face was a mask of cold, hard stone. "We do not have anyone else," she said, her voice dropping an octave. "Your father left before you were born, and my parents are dead to us. We are it, Freya, just us. Do not go dreaming about ghosts. It serves no purpose." But the ghosts tried to reach out, sometimes. The mailman would deliver thick, heavy cardstock postcards. They were always pictures of a place called New Haven Bay on the East Coast. Pictures of a red and white lighthouse standing against a gray ocean, or a cobblestone street dusted with snow, glowing under gas lamps. They never had a return address, just a postmark. Elaine would snatch them up the second she saw them. She would not read them. She would rip them into quarters, the sound of the thick paper tearing like bones snapping, and shove them deep into the kitchen trash. I started checking the mail before she got home. I managed to save 3 of them over the years. I kept them hidden under my mattress. I would stare at that lighthouse, wondering who was sending signals to a house that refused to receive them. As I got older, I accepted my role. I was the useful one, the strong one. When the water heater broke, Liam sat on the couch complaining about the cold shower, while I watched instructional videos at the library and learned how to replace the heating element. When the roof leaked, I was the one up on the ladder with a bucket of tar. By the time I was 20, I was working 2 jobs and taking classes at the community college. I wanted to go into logistics. I liked the idea of systems, of things moving efficiently from point A to point B. It made sense. It was orderly. But order requires resources. The winter of my 21st year, the transmission on the family van died. Elaine sat at the kitchen table, weeping into her hands, talking about how Liam needed the car to get to his internships, how without it, his future was clipped. I did not even have to think about it. It was a reflex. I walked down to the registrar's office the next morning and withdrew from my classes. I took my tuition refund, combined it with my savings, and paid for the transmission. I told myself it was a loan. I told myself I would go back next semester. I never did. I became the engine that kept the family running so Liam could be the passenger. The final blow came 2 years ago. I came home from a double shift at the warehouse to find the house filled with boxes. Not packing boxes for moving, but boxes of new things. A new laptop for Liam. New suits. "Where did this come from?" I asked, feeling a pit open in my stomach. Elaine looked manic, her eyes bright and feverish. "I made an investment, Freya, for Liam's future. He got into that prestigious program at the university, but the scholarship only covers tuition. He needs housing. He needs status. I mortgaged the house." "You what?" The room spun. Mom, the house is the only thing we own. The payments. Can we afford the payments? It will be fine, she snapped. Once Liam graduates, he will be making 6 figures. He will pay it off in a month. You just have to have faith. Faith does not pay the bank. The interest rates were predatory. The payments ballooned. Within 18 months, the foreclosure notice was stapled to the front door. The day the sheriff came to lock us out was the day I learned exactly where I stood. I stood on the curb with my suitcase, watching the movers haul our sofa onto the grass. Where are we going to go? I asked Elaine. She wouldn't look at me. She was busy adjusting Liam's collar. Liam has a place, she muttered. A dormitory, and, well, a friend, a sponsor. Someone who believes in his potential helped get him settled. A sponsor, I asked. What about us? What about me? Finally, she looked at me. There was no sadness in her eyes, only a terrifying practicality. You are nearly 30. Freya, you have been working for years. You are capable. You will figure it out. There was not enough for everyone. Not enough. Just like the picture frame. Liam got into a sleek black car that afternoon. He did not look back. Elaine went with him to get him settled, promising she would call me when she found a motel. She never called. I took a bus to Riverbridge because the ticket was cheap, and I heard there was factory work. I landed a job at the station, cleaning up after other people's journeys. I rented a room that was essentially a closet in a boarding house that smelled of cabbage and mildew. I tried. I really did. I worked every hour they gave me. But the economy of poverty is a trap. One tooth infection wiped out my savings. 1 week of reduced hours meant I was late on rent. Then the landlord raised the rent by $50 without notice. When I came home to find my key didn't work and my bag sitting in the hallway, I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I just felt a profound, exhausting numbness. I had nowhere to go, no friends, because I had spent my 20s working, no family, because they had pruned me off the tree. So, I went to the only place that was open, the station. That was 11 nights ago. Now, lying here on this metal bench, listening to the hum of the vending machine, I watched the giant electronic departure board high up on the wall, the amber letters flip over with a satisfying clack, clack, clack sound. 23 Yazurun, Chicago, on time, 23:15. Sates. Lewis. Delayed. The board dictates the lives of everyone here. It tells them where to go and when to leave. I envy them. They have a destination. In this station, nobody looks you in the eye. If you are wearing a uniform, you are part of the architecture. If you are sleeping on a bench, you are an obstacle to be stepped around. No one asks. How was your day, Freya? They only ask, when is the next train to Detroit? Or, why is the bathroom closed? I am a ghost in a high-visibility vest. I have vanished from the photograph completely. I am certain that if I died right here on this bench, the only thing that would change is that someone else would have to mop the floor tomorrow night. I close my eyes, trying to block out the screech of a freight train braking on track 9. I am invisible. I am nothing, or so I believed, until the loudspeaker clicked on for the 11th time tonight. This time, it did not announce a train. It announced a resurrection. The 11th night was colder than the 10 that had preceded it. It was a sharp, biting cold that seemed to bypass my gray polyester uniform and settle directly into my bones. I had just finished mopping the women's restroom in Sector C, wringing out the gray water that smelled of industrial lemon disinfectant and wet concrete. My hands were raw. The skin cracked around the knuckles, and my back was throbbing with a dull, rhythmic ache that had become my constant companion. I was exhausted, but my mind was alert, wired by the fear that the security guard, a new guy with a flashlight he liked to shine in people's faces, would find my sleeping spot on the bench. I was pushing the mop bucket toward the maintenance closet when the station's public address system crackled to life. Usually, at 2 a.m, the speakers only emitted static or the occasional pre-recorded warning about unattended luggage, but this time, the voice was human, crisp, and directed specifically at me. Freya Turner, passenger, Freya Turner, please proceed to locker area 4. Row B. I froze. The mop handle slipped in my grip and clattered against the plastic rim of the bucket. The sound echoed through the empty concourse like a gunshot. My heart hammered against my ribs. My first instinct was panic. Pure, unadulterated panic. They knew I was sleeping here. The announcement was a trap to get me out in the open so they could hand me a trespassing ticket and throw me out into the snow. Passenger Freya Turner. The word passenger felt like a mockery. I was not a passenger. I was debris. I looked toward the exit doors. The streetlights outside were blurred by the sleet hitting the glass. If I ran, I would leave my backpack and suitcase behind, my clothes, my documents, the 3 postcards I had saved from the trash. I could not leave them. Curiosity began to war with the fear. Why use the PA system? Why direct me to the lockers? If they wanted to arrest me, they would have just sent the guard to the restroom. The voice had not sounded angry. It sounded formal. I took a breath, gripped the handle of my rolling suitcase which I had hidden behind the vending machine, and slung my backpack over one shoulder. I walked out of the shadows of Sector C and into the harsh, buzzing light of the main hall. The wheels of my suitcase rumbled on the terrazzo floor, a lonely sound in the vast, empty space. I felt exposed, like an insect crawling across a dinner plate. Locker Area 4 was in the old wing of the station, a section where the brass railings were tarnished and the floor tiles were chipped. It was rarely used. When I rounded the corner, I saw the night shift station manager standing there. He was a balding man named Frank, who usually spent his shifts doing crossword puzzles. Tonight, he was staring at a bank of metal lockers with a look of profound confusion on his face. He looked up as I approached. He squinted at my uniform, then at my face. "You are Freya Turner?" he asked. He sounded skeptical. I nodded, gripping my backpack strap tighter. "Yes. Is there a problem?" "Am I being evicted?" Frank shook his head, looking back at the small tablet computer in his hand. "No. Weirdest thing I have seen in 15 years working here." The system flagged an expiration alert. "Usually, that means we cut the lock and toss the junk. But this locker, number 47, it has a flag I have never seen before." He tapped the screen. "It says the rental fee was prepaid, in full, for 20 years. I stared at him. 20 years. "That is impossible. I do not have $20, let alone enough for 20 years. "It was not paid by you," Frank said. "It was paid by a trust account out of a bank in Delaware. Auto renewal, ironclad, but the term is up tonight, exactly at midnight. The instructions popped up on my screen 5 minutes ago. It says I am to surrender the key to Freya Turner, or the direct descendant of Elaine Turner, provided identification is verified." He looked at me again, his eyes lingering on my name tag, which was crooked. I showed him my driver's license. My hands were shaking so badly I almost dropped it. He scanned it, shrugged, and reached into his pocket. He pulled out a small brass key. It did not look like the modern electronic keys the other lockers used. This was old metal, heavy and cold. He handed it to me. "Whatever is in there, it has been sitting in the dark longer than you have been an adult. Kid, good luck." Frank walked away, shaking his head, eager to get back to his heated booth. I stood alone in front of locker number 47. It was a square metal door, painted a dull gray that had peeled in the corners to reveal rust. I inserted the key. It turned with a stiff, grinding resistance, the sound of metal waking up after a long slumber. The door popped open. The locker was empty, except for a single object resting on the metal floor. It was a thick, manila envelope. It was sealed with red wax, something I had only seen in movies. It looked archaic. It looked important. I reached in and took it. The paper felt heavy, expensive. On the front, written in a jagged, forceful cursive with black ink, were the words, "For Freya, my granddaughter." From Henry Gray. My breath hitched in my throat. Gray. The name hit me with the force of a physical blow. Henry Gray. I had never heard the name spoken aloud, but I had seen it. I had seen it on the plaques by the station entrance. I had seen it on the side of the freight containers I watched pass by every night. Gray Rail and Freight, one of the biggest logistics empires in the Midwest, and he was claiming to be my grandfather. I sank onto the metal bench opposite the lockers. The cold metal bit into my thighs through my trousers. But I was numb to it. My mother had told me we had no one. She had told me my grandparents were dead, poor, and forgotten. I broke the wax seal. It snapped with a dry crack. Inside was a letter, folded precisely, and a few other items. I unfolded the letter. The date at the top was from 12 years ago. My dearest Freya, if you are reading this, it means two things. First, that I am dead. Second, and far more tragically, it means that someone has stolen your life. The handwriting was shaky but aggressive, the letters digging into the paper. I am writing this because your mother, Elaine, has made it clear that I am not to be part of your world. She calls it protection. I call it pride. We had our differences. I was a hard man, and she was a stubborn daughter. When she left, she cut the cord. But know this, I never signed a single paper disowning her, and I certainly never disowned you. I have spent my life building lines, rail lines, supply lines. I know how to move things from where they are to where they need to be. But I could not move my own family back to me. I have established the Gray Line Trust. It is not just a pot of gold. It is a test. I call it the integrity trigger. In my will, I have stipulated that the primary beneficiary must be a descendant who knows the value of labor, someone who has worked with their hands, someone who is self-made, not just self-entitled. I have built an empire on sweat and steel, and I will not have it inherited by someone who has never had dirt under their fingernails. I looked down at my own hands. The nails were short, jagged, and rimmed with the gray dust of the station. However, I fear that by the time you are old enough to understand this, vultures may have circled. There are men around me, and perhaps around your mother, who see a trust fund as a buffet. I have written a safeguard. Any document that purports to remove you from the trust, or to waive your rights after your 18th birthday, is void and contrary to my will unless it bears your wet signature, witnessed on video recording. If you are reading this in a locker at a train station, it is because I instructed my lawyers to place a fail-safe in the one place I knew would always be open to a wanderer, a beacon in the dark. Do not let them take it. Freya, it is yours. But only if you are strong enough to fight for it. Your grandfather, Henry Gray. My vision blurred, not with tears, but with a sudden, dizzying rush of adrenaline. A beacon in the dark. He knew, somehow, 12 years ago. This man knew I might end up here, or maybe he just knew the nature of the world he was leaving me in. I reached back into the envelope. There was a business card, heavy and embossed. Pearson Lockwood, LLP, Attorneys at Law, Harborview, and paper-clipped to it was a train ticket. It was an old-style ticket, printed on stiff cardstock, valid for a single passage on the Gray Line from Riverbridge to Harborview. The date field was blank. I sat there, the station humming around me. My mother, Elaine, had looked me in the eye 1,000 times and said we were alone. She had watched me scrub floors and fix roofs and sell my future to pay for a van, all while knowing that her father was Henry Gray. The Henry Gray. Why? Why would she hide this to protect me, or to protect Liam, the brother with the secret sponsor, the brother with the tuition paid for by an anonymous donor? A cold realization washed over me, colder than the air in the station. If I was the heir, and I was currently homeless and broke, then where was the money? Who was spending it? If you are reading this, it means someone has stolen your life. I looked at the station clock. It was 3 a.m. The letter felt radioactive in my hands. I felt a sudden, intense paranoia. I looked up at the security camera, the one I usually slept under for safety. Now, it looked like an eye. Who was watching? I heard footsteps, not the shuffling gait of a homeless person, nor the heavy tread of Frank the manager. These were sharp, deliberate footsteps, leather soles on stone. I shoved the letter and the ticket inside my jacket, zipping it up to my chin. I stood up, pulling my suitcase handle, ready to run. A man stepped out of the shadows near the entrance of the locker bay. He was older, perhaps in his 60s, wearing a charcoal gray wool coat that looked like it cost more than everything I had earned in the last 5 years combined. He had silver hair, neatly combed, and he held a leather briefcase. He did not look like he belonged in Riverbridge Central Station at 3 a.m. He looked like he belonged in a boardroom or a country club. He stopped 10 feet away from me. He did not look at the lockers. He looked directly at me. His eyes were sharp, assessing, taking in my uniform, my boots, the desperation in my stance. He did not look at me with pity. He looked at me with recognition. He took a step closer, and I tensed, gripping my backpack strap. "Freya Turner," he asked. His voice was deep, calm, and carried a tone of absolute authority. "Who are you?" I asked, my voice raspy. He reached into his coat pocket. I flinched, but he only pulled out a pair of reading glasses. He put them on and looked at me again, as if verifying a serial number. "My name is Michael Rowan," he said. "I am the executor of the Henry Gray estate and the senior partner at Pearson Lockwood. I have been waiting for that locker to be opened for a very long time." He paused, glancing at the empty locker door swinging slightly in the draft. "We received an automated signal at our firm when the key was used. I was nearby. I have been staying in Riverbridge for 3 days, hoping the expiration date would trigger something." He looked at my face, searching for something familiar. "I have a question for you." "Freya," he said, his voice lowering, "and the answer is very important." I swallowed hard. "What?" He took a step closer, ignoring the filth of the station floor. "Does your mother still use the name Elaine Turner?" The question hung in the air, heavy with implication. It was not a polite inquiry, it was an investigation. "Yes," I whispered. Michael Rowan nodded slowly. His jaw tightened. "Then we have a great deal of work to do, because according to the paperwork filed in my office 10 years ago, Elaine Turner does not exist, and neither do you." The train ride to Harborview was a blur of motion that my brain refused to process. I sat in a plush velvet-upholstered seat by the window, clutching my battered backpack as if it contained the crown jewels. I was still wearing my work uniform, the gray polyester jacket with the faded Riverbridge maintenance patch on the shoulder. I smelled like stale coffee and the chemical tang of industrial floor cleaner, a sharp, unpleasant contrast to the scent of the train car, which smelled of leather and expensive cologne. Michael Rowan sat across from me, reading a newspaper. He had purchased the tickets without blinking, paying a sum that would have covered my rent for 2 months. I kept glancing at him, waiting for the other shoe to drop. I was waiting for him to ask for a processing fee, or to tell me this was all a cruel reality TV prank, but he just read his paper, occasionally glancing at the passing landscape where the rust-colored factories of the Midwest slowly gave way to the green hills and slate-gray waters of the East Coast. When we arrived in Harborview, the air was different. It was salty, cold, and smelled of old money. We took a cab to the financial district, stopping in front of a brownstone building with a brass plaque that read Pearson Lockwood LLP. Inside, it felt like stepping into a parallel universe. The office did not look like a place where business was done. It looked like a library where history was kept. The walls were paneled in dark, polished mahogany that seemed to absorb the light. Oil paintings of 19th century steamships and locomotives hung in heavy gold frames. There were maps, vast and intricate, showing rail lines stretching across the continent like black veins. Michael led me into his office, a room large enough to house my entire family. Back when we had a house, he gestured for me to sit in a leather chair that groaned softly under my weight. "I feel like I'm trespassing," I said, my voice sounding too loud in the quiet room. "You are not trespassing, Freya," Michael said, placing his briefcase on the desk. "In a way, you are coming home, or at least, to the engine room of your family history." He opened a drawer and pulled out a thick file folder. "Your grandfather, Henry Gray, was not just a man who owned a few trains. He said he was the founder of Gray Rail and Freight. He built a logistics empire that, at its peak, was valued in the low nine figures. We are talking about hundreds of millions of dollars in assets, rolling stock, real estate, and shipping contracts. My mouth went dry. Hundreds of millions. I thought about the $12 in my pocket. I thought about the time I ate a discarded sandwich from a station bin because I had to pay for my antibiotics. Michael opened the file. He spread 3 documents out on the desk. "This is the will," he said, tapping the first document. Henry was a complicated man. He believed that wealth destroyed character unless character was built first. That is why he created the Gray Line Trust. The primary beneficiary was named as your mother, Elaine Gray. He paused, looking at me over his glasses. However, there was a clause. If Elaine refused the inheritance, or if she passed away, the trust was to dissolve and pass directly to her descendants by blood, provided they met the integrity trigger. That is the clause about self-sufficient labor that you read in the letter. "Okay," I said, trying to follow the legal maze. "So, my mother refused it." Michael's expression darkened. He pushed the second document toward me. "This is where the story stops making sense. Freya, this is a document titled Renunciation of Inheritance, filed 10 years ago. It states that Elaine Gray voluntarily waives all rights to the Gray Line Trust and the Henry Gray estate." I looked at the paper. It was dense with legal jargon. But at the bottom, there was a signature. Elaine Turner. "That looks like her signature," I said softly. "Look closer," Michael said. He pulled out a magnifying glass and a third document, an old canceled check from 30 years ago. "This check is from when Elaine was 20 years old, before she left home. Look at the letter G in her maiden name, and the T in Turner. Your mother had a very specific way of looping her T-bars. It was a sharp, upward stroke. Now, look at the renunciation document." I leaned in. The signature on the legal document was shaky. The lines were jagged, as if the hand holding the pen was trembling violently, and the T-bar was flat. It did not loop up. "It looks weak," I said. "It looks forged," Michael corrected. "Or, at the very least, coerced. Our handwriting expert believes the tremor is artificial. It is what we call a sophisticated forgery attempting to look like a nervous or elderly hand, but the muscle memory is wrong." He flipped the page of the renunciation document. "But that is not the worst part," he said. "Read paragraph 4. I read the text. The undersigned, Elaine Turner, hereby declares under penalty of perjury that she has no living issue, no natural-born children, and no adopted dependents. The Gray lineage ends with her." The room seemed to tilt. I read it again. "No living issue. She said I did not exist," I whispered. "According to this piece of paper," Michael said, his voice grim, "you do not, and neither does your brother, Liam." By declaring she had no children, the trust could not pass to the next generation. It had nowhere to go. "So where did the money go?" I asked, feeling a surge of anger that was hot and sharp. Michael stood up and walked to a side table, pouring a glass of water. "Enter Mr. Gavin Rhodes," he said, spitting the name out like it was poison. "Gavin is the nephew of Henry's second wife, not a blood relative. Henry despised him. He called him a leech. Henry specifically excluded him from the main will. However, when a trust has no beneficiary, the court appoints a temporary executor to manage the assets until a suitable heir is found or the assets are liquidated." Michael turned back to me. "Gavin Rhodes stepped in 10 years ago. He claimed that since Elaine was childless and had vanished, he would sadly take on the burden of managing the estate. He set up an entity called the Rhodes Line Management Trust. And he stole it," I asked. Michael shook his head. "It is more clever than theft. It is extraction. He cannot legally take the principal sum, but he can charge management fees." He opened a ledger on his laptop and turned the screen toward me. "For the last 10 years, the Rhodes Line Management Trust has billed the estate for consulting, overhead, and administrative costs. The current rate is roughly $150,000 a month." I choked. $150,000 a month. "That is $1.8 million a year," Michael said calmly. "For 10 years, That is $18 million that has flowed from your grandfather's legacy into Gavin Rhodes's pockets. He has bought a vacation home in Aspen. He drives a custom Italian sports car. He is living like a king on the interest of money that belongs to you. I sat back, feeling sick. $18 million, while I was sleeping on a bench, while I was scrubbing toilets, while my mother was losing her house. Wait, I said, a sudden thought striking me. If Gavin is getting rich, why is my mother living in a rental in Milford? Why did she let her house get foreclosed? If she signed this, did he pay her? That is the question, Michael said. If she signed it willingly, she sold your birthright for pennies. If she didn't, then this is fraud on a massive scale. He leaned forward, his elbows on the desk. Listen to me, Freya. If you are truly Henry Gray's granddaughter, you are the victim of a crime that has been happening in slow motion for a decade. You are being robbed every single day. But to stop it, to get any of this back, we have to fight a war on 3 fronts. He held up 3 fingers. 1, we have to prove blood. We have to prove you are who you say you are. 2, we have to prove fraud. We have to prove that document is a lie and that Gavin Rhodes knows you exist. And 3, this is the hardest part. We have to prove the integrity trigger. He pointed to the clause in the will. Henry was very specific. The heir must be self-made. They must be engaged in manual or skilled labor. They cannot be idle. If we prove you are the heir, Gavin's lawyers will immediately try to argue that you are unfit, that you are a vagrant, or that you do not meet the standards of the trust. I looked at him, and a laugh bubbled up in my throat. It was a dark, jagged laugh. You have got to be kidding me. I said, you think the hard part is proving I work? I held up my hands. They were calloused, rough, and stained with grease that no amount of soap could remove. Mr. Rowan, I have been working since I was 16. I have fixed roofs, unclogged sewage lines, stocked shelves, and for the last 2 weeks, I have been cleaning human waste off the floor of a train station. My entire life is labor. I have done nothing but work. Michael looked at my hands, then at my face. A small, rare smile touched his lips. I know, he said. That is why I waited for you. That is why I think you are the only one who can beat him. Gavin Rhodes has never worked a day in his life. He does not understand people like you. He thinks you are trash. He has no idea that you are exactly what Henry ordered. He opened a drawer and pulled out a small plastic box. This is a DNA collection kit, he said. It is a simple cheek swab. We have Henry's genetic profile on file from his medical records. If this matches, we file an emergency petition with the Harborview Probate Court tomorrow morning. We will freeze the assets. I took the kit. It felt light, insignificant, but it was a bomb. I will do it. I said, good, Michael said. But Freya, you need to understand the danger. Gavin has millions of dollars at his disposal. He has lawyers who are sharks. When we file this, he will come for you. He will dig into your past. He will try to destroy your reputation. Let him try. I said, I have nothing left to destroy. I stood up, feeling a strange new energy coursing through me. It was not hope, exactly. It was anger, cold, focused anger. I need to go back to the station. I said, I cannot lose my job. If the will says I have to be working, then I am going to work. Michael nodded. That is smart. Keep the routine. Do not give them any ammunition. As I turned to leave the office, something on the wall caught my eye. It was a black and white photograph, framed simply in black wood. It showed an older man, Henry Gray, standing in a construction site. He was wearing a hard hat, holding a large roll of blueprints, pointing at a steel structure rising from the ground. I stopped. I knew that structure. I knew the curve of those iron trusses. I knew the specific pattern of the glass ceiling panels. That is Riverbridge, I said. Michael walked over and stood beside me. Yes, he said. That was Henry's last major project. He put up the capital to build the Riverbridge Central Station. He designed the ventilation system himself. He wanted it to be a hub for the working class, a place that was functional and durable. I stared at the photo. The man in the picture had a stern face, but his eyes were crinkled at the corners. He was standing right where the Sector B waiting area was now, right where my bench was. I felt a chill run down my spine, but this time, it was not from the cold. He built it. I whispered. I had spent 11 nights sleeping in a station I thought was a cold, indifferent void, but it wasn't. It was his. He had built the roof that kept the snow off me. He had built the walls that shielded me from the wind. I looked at Michael. He knew. I said, in the letter. He said he left the key in the one place open to a wanderer. He knew if I hit rock bottom, I might end up there. He was a man who understood logistics. Freya, Michael said softly. He knew that when things break, they end up at the bottom of the hill. He just made sure he built a catcher's mitt at the bottom. I tightened my grip on the DNA kit. I am going to take back what is mine. I said, not just the money. I am going to take back my name. Michael opened the door for me. Then go catch your train. Ms. Turner, or should I say, Ms. Gray. I walked out of the mahogany office and back into the cold street, but I did not feel small anymore. I felt like a train that had finally found its track, and I was building up a full head of steam. Milford looked exactly the same as I remembered it, which was the most depressing thing about it. It was a town painted in shades of beige and regret. I drove a rental car Michael had arranged for me, a nondescript sedan that felt too clean for these streets. In my pocket, burning a hole through the fabric of my coat, was a limited power of attorney document drafted by the partners at Pierce and Lockwood. It gave me the legal right to secure any and all personal identification documents bearing the name Freya Turner or Freya Gray found in the residence of Elaine Turner. My mother had moved after the foreclosure. Her new place was a duplex on the wrong side of the train tracks, ironic. Considering where I had been sleeping for the past 2 weeks, the siding was peeling, revealing gray wood underneath like rotting flesh. But when I stepped inside, the contrast hit me like a physical slap. The living room was cramped and smelled of stale cigarette smoke and lemon air freshener. But dominated the space was a 60-inch flat-screen television that must have cost $2,000. And there, sitting atop it like a religious icon, was a framed photograph of Liam. He was leaning against a cherry-red convertible, holding a set of keys, beaming in front of a university gate. Freya, I turned. Elaine was standing in the doorway of the kitchen. She looked older, her hair thinner, wearing a bathrobe at 2 p.m. Her eyes darted to my hands, checking for luggage. When she saw I was empty-handed, relief washed over her face, followed immediately by suspicion. I told you, she said, her voice sharp and defensive. I cannot help you. The rent here is high, and I have to send money to Liam for his books. You are the older one. You have to figure it out yourself. I did not say hello. I did not ask how she was. I just looked at her. Really looked at her. For the first time in years, I saw the fear living in the lines around her mouth. I am not here for money. Mom, I said, I am here for paper. She frowned, crossing her arms. What are you talking about? I took a step forward. I met a man named Michael Rowan yesterday. I said. The color drained from her face so fast it looked like a magic trick. Her arms dropped to her sides. He told me about the integrity trigger. I continued, keeping my voice steady, though my heart was hammering against my ribs. He told me about Henry Gray. Elaine made a sound that was half gasp, half whimper. She grabbed the back of a dining chair to steady herself. Her eyes did not look at me. They darted, instinctively, uncontrollably, toward the bedroom door. Specifically, toward the tall, cheap particle board wardrobe in the corner. You have no right, she whispered. We have no one. I told you. You lied. I said, you lied for 29 years. Before she could respond, the front door opened behind me. A gust of cold wind blew in, followed by a man I had never met, yet instantly recognized from the dossier Michael had shown me, Gavin Rhodes. He was wearing a casual polo shirt and khakis, looking like a suburban dad returning from a golf game, not a man who was siphoning millions of dollars from a dead man's estate. He walked in with an air of familiarity, of ownership. Elaine, honey, I brought the... He stopped when he saw me. His eyes narrowed, scanning my face. It took him a second, but he put it together. He smiled, a greasy, practiced smile that did not reach his eyes. "Well, this must be the famous Freya," he said. "Elaine has told me so much about you. I am Gavin, a friend of the family. I have been helping your mother out with her finances." He walked over to Elaine and placed a hand on her shoulder. It was a possessive gesture. He squeezed, just a little too hard. Elaine flinched, but she did not pull away. "I know exactly who you are, Gavin," I said, "and I know about the Roads Line Management Trust." The smile stayed fixed on his face, but his eyes went dead. "I see," he said softly. "Well, legal matters can be so confusing for laypeople. I was just trying to protect your mother's interests. The estate was messy. I ignored him. I walked past them, heading straight for the bedroom. Hey," Elaine screamed, lunging for me. "You cannot go in there." Gavin moved to block my path, his casual demeanor vanishing. He was big, blocking the hallway. "This is a private residence. Freya," he said, his voice dropping to a growl. "You are trespassing. I suggest you leave before I call the sheriff." I stopped inches from his chest. I pulled the power of attorney document from my pocket and held it up. "This is a court-authorized order," I said, "and I have a locksmith waiting in his van outside. If you try to stop me, or if you touch me, I will call the Harborview Probate Court and the local police. I will tell them you are obstructing a federal probate investigation." Gavin hesitated. He was a bully, but he was a calculated one. He knew that a scene with the police would generate a paper trail, the one thing he had spent 10 years avoiding. He stepped aside, his face twisting into a sneer. "Go ahead," he spat. "It is just a box of old junk." I walked into the bedroom. The wardrobe was open. On the top shelf, pushed back into the shadows, was the object that had haunted my childhood curiosity. A gray metal box, dented and scratched, with a piece of masking tape on the lid that simply read, "Tax." When I was 10, I had tried to touch it once. Elaine had screamed at me so loud I had wet myself. She had told me it contained papers about her debts, things that would hurt us if they ever got out. I pulled it down. It was heavy. I carried it out to the kitchen table. Elaine was weeping now, sitting in the chair, her face buried in her hands. Gavin was leaning against the wall, watching me with the eyes of a snake waiting to strike. The box was locked. I walked to the front door and waved to the locksmith I had hired, a burly guy named Dave, who was waiting in his van. He came in with his tools. "You cannot do this," Elaine sobbed. "Those are my private papers, Freya," Gavin warned. "You are making a mistake. We can work something out. There is no need to air dirty laundry." "Open it," I told Dave. It took him 30 seconds. The lock clicked, and the lid sprang open. I paid Dave $50, and he left. The room was silent, save for Elaine's ragged breathing. I reached into the box. The first thing I pulled out was a birth certificate, but it was not the one I had used to get my driver's license. That one, the one I knew, listed my father as unknown and my mother as Elaine Turner. This one was different. It was older. It listed my mother as Elaine Gray, and in the line for grandparent guardian, it listed Henry Gray, with an address in Harborview. So I was real, I said, my voice trembling. "I was a Gray before you erased me." I dug deeper. There was a stack of letters, tied with a rubber band. They were addressed to Henry Gray. But the stamps were never canceled. They were unsent. I opened one. It was in Elaine's handwriting. "From 25 years ago. Daddy, I am sorry. I know you said I had to stand on my own 2 feet, but it is so hard. I sent you the picture of Freya. She looks just like you around the eyes. I want to come home, but I cannot bear to hear you say, 'I told you so.' And at the bottom, I do not want my daughter to pay the price for my ego." "You never sent them," I said, looking at Elaine. "You wanted to go back. Why didn't you?" Elaine looked up, her eyes red. "I was afraid." She whispered, and then Gavin came. He told me it was too late. He told me Henry hated me. He told me if I tried to contact him, he would cut us off completely. I looked at Gavin. He shrugged. Unbothered. I managed expectations. I went back to the box. Under the letters were bank statements, dozens of them. I unfolded one from 3 years ago. It showed a monthly transfer of $5,000 into an account named Liam Education Fund, originating from an account labeled Consulting Expense, Roads Line Management. I pulled out another paper. It was a receipt from a dealership 2 months ago. Payment in full, $55,000. 2024. Convertible Mustang. Buyer, Gavin Rhodes. Gift recipient, Liam Turner. The air left my lungs. I stared at the photo of Liam on the TV. The car. The scholarship. The mysterious sponsor who believed in his talent. You bought it. I whispered. Not with your money. With mine. I looked at my mother. I was sleeping on a bench. Mom, I was eating crackers for dinner, and you were letting this man use my inheritance to buy Liam a sports car. Elaine flinched. Liam has a future, she cried out, desperate. He is going to be someone you are tough. Freya, you always could handle the hard stuff. Liam needs help. Gavin said the money was just sitting there. He said it was a loophole. A loophole, I repeated, and then I found the last document. It was at the very bottom of the box. It was a medical form. I recognized it instantly. I was 19. My appendix had burst. I was in the hospital, groggy from anesthesia and pain medication. Elaine had come in with a stack of papers. Just insurance forms. Honey, she had said, sign here so the doctors get paid. I held the document up. It was not an insurance form. It was a general waiver of claims and assignment of rights. It stated that I, Freya Turner, being of sound mind, voluntarily assigned all current and future financial interests in any familial estate to the management of Roads Line Management, in exchange for medical considerations. You made me sign away my life while I was on morphine. I said. My voice was so cold it frightened even me. Gavin pushed off the wall. It is a legal document. Freya, notarized. You signed it. You gave up your claim. You have nothing. I looked at the date on the waiver. Then I looked at Gavin. I showed this to my lawyer this morning via fax. I lied. I hadn't. But I knew enough from what Michael said. He says a waiver signed under medical duress, without independent counsel, hiding the true nature of the assets, is not just void. It is evidence of criminal fraud. Gavin's face twitched. I gathered the papers, the birth certificates, the unsent letters, the bank statements showing the car payments, and the fraudulent waiver. I shoved them into the manila envelope I had brought with me. I am taking these, I said. Elaine stood up. Freya, please, if you do this, if you sue him, the money stops. Liam will be kicked out of school. They will take the car. I looked at her. I looked at the woman who had cut me out of the family photo because I didn't fit the frame. Liam is 25 years old. Mom, I said, maybe it is time he learned how to take the bus. I walked to the door. Gavin stepped in front of me again. You walk out that door with those papers, Freya, and you are declaring war. You have no idea what I can do. I can bury you in legal fees for 20 years. I can make sure you never work in this town again. I looked him in the eye. I do not work in this town. Gavin, I said, I work at the train station, and I have already been buried for 20 years. I am just digging myself out. I turned to my mother for the last time. You told me my whole life that you were afraid Grandfather Henry would steal me from you. I said, you said he was a monster who would take over my life. Elaine was sobbing silently now. But he didn't steal me. Mom, I said, you did. You stole my life and you handed it to a stranger because he bought you a big TV and promised to make Liam a star. I opened the door. The cold air rushed in, cleansing the stale smell of the house. Goodbye, Mom. I walked out to the car, throwing the envelope onto the passenger seat. My hands were shaking, but my grip on the steering wheel was tight. I did not look back at the peeling gray house. I put the car in gear and drove toward the highway, toward Harborview, toward the war that was coming. Back in the conference room at Pierce and Lockwood, the atmosphere had shifted from a quiet library to a war room. I dumped the contents of the gray metal box onto the polished mahogany table, and it was like tossing raw meat into a tank of sharks. Michael had assembled his team, and they descended on the papers with a terrifying efficiency. There was a forensic accountant named Sarah, who typed on her laptop with a speed that blurred her fingers. There was a handwriting expert named Dr. Aris, who wielded a jeweler's loupe and hummed to himself as he examined the medical waiver I had been forced to sign. And there was a litigator named Vance, who looked like he had not slept in a week and ran on pure caffeine and malice, for 3 hours. I sat in the corner, watching my life being dissected. It was a strange sensation, feeling both like the most important person in the room and completely irrelevant. I was the catalyst, but now the machine had taken over. Sarah spoke first, not looking up from her screen. "I have tracked the routing number from the car dealership receipt," she said. "It bounces through 3 different entities. First, it hits Harborview Heritage Trustees LLC. That sounds legitimate, but it is a shell. It has no employees and no physical office, just a registered agent. From there, the money moves to Rhodes Line Management." She spun her laptop around to show us a Google Street View image. Rhodes Line Management is listed at this address in Wilmington, Delaware, she said. I squinted at the screen. It was a strip mall next to a dry cleaner. The address corresponded to a mailboxes, etc. Storefront, a post office box. I said, "My inheritance is being managed out of a rented mailbox." "Exactly," Michael said, pacing the length of the room. "It is a classic layering scheme. Gavin Rhodes creates a trust to pay himself management fees for managing nothing. He is moving money from your grandfather's estate, washing it through Delaware to avoid state taxes, and then funneling it into his personal accounts under the guise of consulting expenses." Dr. Aris looked up from the medical waiver. "This waiver is garbage," he pronounced. "The signature matches Freya's hand. Yes, but look at the trailing lines on the last letters. They drift downward. That indicates extreme fatigue or sedation. Coupled with the hospital timestamp I found in the corner 3 a.m, no judge in this state will uphold it. It is evidence of undue influence. It is predatory." Michael slammed his hand on the table. It was the first time I had seen him show genuine emotion. "That is enough," he said. "Vance, draw it up." "Draw what up?" I asked. "The filing," Michael said. "We are not sending a letter. We are dropping a hammer. We are filing a civil suit in the Harborview Superior Court. Freya Turner versus Gavin Rhodes. Rhodes Line Management. And does 1 through 10. We are alleging fraud, conversion of assets, breach of fiduciary duty, and elder abuse regarding your mother." He turned to Vance. "I want an ex parte hearing. Emergency temporary restraining order on all assets. Freeze the accounts. And send preservation notices to every bank Gavin has ever looked at. If he so much as buys a stick of gum with estate money after today, I want him held in contempt." Vance nodded and practically ran out of the room. I sat there, stunned. For 10 years, Gavin had been the monster in the closet, the man who controlled the purse strings while my mother begged. Now, in the span of an afternoon, he was just a defendant. Michael walked over to the window, looking out at the harbor. The gray water was chopping against the docks. He did not look triumphant anymore. He looked worried. "There is a problem. Freya," he said quietly. My stomach dropped. "There is always a problem. What is it?" "The integrity trigger," he said. I frowned. "We talked about this. I have worked my whole life. I have the pay stubs. I have the calloused hands." "Yes," Michael said, turning to face me. "You have the history. But the will is very specific about the present. It says the heir must be currently engaged in self-sustaining labor at the time of inheritance activation." He walked back to the table and picked up the file. "Technically, Freya, you are unemployed. You lost your room. You are on an unauthorized leave of absence from the station to come here. If Gavin's lawyers are smart, and they are expensive, so they will be smart, they will argue that you are a vagrant. They will say you are transient. They will argue that the integrity trigger has not been met because right now, at this very second, you are not a working member of society. You are a woman sleeping on a bench who just hired a high-powered law firm." I felt the heat rise in my cheeks. "I am on a break," I said defensively. "I am fighting for my life." "The court deals in technicalities," Michael said. If we go before the judge next week, and you are living in a hotel here in Harborview, living off the retainer I am advancing you, Gavin will paint you as a gold digger. He will say you stopped working the moment you smelled money. He will try to void the trust based on the conduct clause. So what do? I asked. Michael looked me dead in the eye. You have to go back, he said. I stared at him. Go back where? To Riverbridge, he said. To the station. You have to go back to your shift. You have to put that uniform on. You need to be clocked in. You need to be scrubbing those floors and fixing those tracks. When we walk into court, I need to be able to say, Your Honor, my client is currently working the night shift to support herself, just as her grandfather intended. I felt a wave of nausea. You want me to go back to cleaning toilets? I asked, my voice rising. I am the heir to a 9-figure fortune. I own the damn station, practically, and you want me to go back and let people treat me like I am invisible. I want you to win, Michael said hard. And to win, you have to be bulletproof. Gavin Rhodes is going to try to humiliate you in the press. He is going to call you a homeless junkie. The only way to beat him is to show him that you are not afraid of the work, that you are exactly who Henry Gray wanted you to be. I slumped in the chair. The idea of going back to the smell of the industrial cleaner, the cold bench, the pitying looks from the commuters, it made me want to scream. I thought I had escaped. I thought the ticket to Harborview was a one-way trip out of the darkness. If I go back, I said, where do I sleep? I still do not have an apartment. I will arrange for a discreet hotel room near the station. Michael said, you will not sleep on the bench, but during work hours, you are Freya Turner, janitor. Not Freya Gray, heiress. I looked at the map on the wall. The Gray Line rail network. It was a web of steel that my grandfather had spun. He had built it with sweat. He wanted me to sweat for it too. Fine, I said. Bitter but resigned. I will go back. I will scrub the floors. But if Gavin Rhodes shows his face... Michael's eyes lit up. He looked at the map again, then at the photo of Henry Gray standing at the Riverbridge construction site. Actually, he said slowly, a smile spreading across his face, that gives me an idea. A very dangerous, very theatrical idea. He walked over to the wall and tapped the location of Riverbridge Central Station. I received an email 3 days ago. He said, from the Riverbridge Transit Authority. They are planning a dedication ceremony. They want to install a plaque in the main concourse honoring the founding donors. They want to honor Henry Gray. He turned to me, his eyes gleaming with the thrill of the hunt. They invited the estate to send a representative to give a speech. Gavin, I said. Gavin loves a microphone more than he loves money. Michael said, he will be there. He will be wearing his best suit, standing on a podium in the middle of your station, talking about Henry's legacy, talking about how heavy the burden of leadership is. Michael walked back to the table and leaned in close. Here is the plan. Freya, we are going to file the lawsuit tomorrow morning under seal. We will get the temporary orders, but we will ask the judge to hold service until the evening, until the ceremony I asked. Exactly. Pearson Lockwood will sponsor the event. We will make sure it is big. Press, cameras, local government. Gavin will think he is the king of the world. And I asked, what do I do? You do your job, Michael said. You keep your head down. You push your cart. You stay invisible. You let him look right through you, just like he always has. He paused. And when he is at the height of his speech, when he is telling the world how much he loved Henry Gray, that is when we serve him. And that is when you take off the mask. It was a heist. But we were not stealing money. We were stealing the narrative. We were going to let Gavin walk into a trap that he had built with his own ego. I looked at my hands again. They were shaking. Not from fear this time, but from anticipation. I will be the background, I said. I am good at that. Michael nodded. This time, the background is going to bite back. The train ride back to Riverbridge that night felt different. I was on the late service. The one that carried the tired, the drunk, and the lonely. The car was dimly lit. Outside, the darkness swallowed the world, broken only by the occasional flash of a signal light or a crossing gate. I sat with my forehead against the cold glass. I was wearing my civilian clothes, but my uniform was folded neatly in my bag. In 4 hours, I would be back on the clock. I would be unclogging drains and wiping down benches. It felt humiliating. I knew that on paper, I was worth hundreds of millions of dollars. I could buy this entire train. I could buy the building I was about to clean. But I had to pretend. I had to play the role of the servant in my own kingdom. But then I thought about the letter. Someone who knows the value of labor. Henry Gray had not been born rich. He had laid tracks. He had swung a hammer. He had built an empire because he understood that the world runs on the backs of people who get their hands dirty. Gavin Rhodes thought power was a suit and a signature. He thought power was being served. I looked at my reflection in the window. I looked tired. I looked worn. But my eyes were clear. I looked down at my hands. The calluses on my palms were hard ridges of skin. There was a cut on my thumb from a sharp piece of metal I had handled 2 nights ago. If you want an heir who knows how to bleed. Grandpa, I whispered to the rhythm of the wheels. Then you got one. My phone buzzed. It was a text from Michael. The motion is ready. The trap is set for Friday. Do not break character. I put the phone away. The train began to slow down. I saw the lights of Riverbridge approaching. The industrial smoke. The orange glow of the street lamps. The hulking shadow of the station. It was not a palace. It was a machine. And I was the mechanic. I stood up and grabbed my bag. The conductor announced the station. Riverbridge Central. End of the line. No. I thought as the doors hissed open and the smell of the city hit me, this is not the end. This is just the platform. I stepped off the train and walked toward the employee entrance. I had a shift to work. I had a floor to clean. And in 48 hours, I had a man to destroy. If Gavin Rhodes wanted to stand on my stage and talk about integrity, he was welcome to try. But he was about to find out that the floor beneath his feet was wet, and I was the one holding the mop. Friday evening at Riverbridge Central Station usually smelled of diesel fumes, wet wool, and cheap coffee. But tonight, the main concourse smelled of fresh lilies and expensive catering. The transformation was insulting. The transit authority had draped massive silk banners from the iron trusses, hiding the rust spots I knew by heart. The banners bore the face of a stern man with deep-set eyes, my grandfather. Henry Gray and the slogan, Henry Gray the Pathfinder of Riverbridge. I was on the clock. My shift had started at 4 in the afternoon, and I was wearing the full uniform, the gray trousers that were too loose at the waist, the heavy steel-toed boots, and the polyester vest with the reflective yellow stripes, my name tag. A piece of cheap blue plastic was pinned crookedly to my chest. It read, Freya, and underneath, in smaller letters, Sanitation. I pushed my cart along the perimeter of the VIP area, which had been roped off with red velvet stanchions. My job tonight was to be invisible. I was to collect stray cocktail napkins, wipe up spilled champagne, and ensure that the floor shone for the shoes of people who had never walked on a sticky surface in their lives. To them, I was not a person. I was a Roomba with a heartbeat. The guests began to arrive at 6. First came the local politicians, shaking hands and looking around the station as if they were visiting a zoo. Then came the board members of Gray Rail and Freight, men and women who looked like they were made of dry cleaning starch and old money. They stood in tight circles, sipping sparkling water, ignoring the commuters who were being corralled into the side corridors to avoid disturbing the event. Reporters from the Riverbridge Gazette and a regional financial news channel set up their tripods near the stage. A massive LED screen, usually used to display the arrival and departure times, had been hijacked. Instead of showing that the 6:40 to St. Louis was delayed, it cycled through a slideshow of Henry Gray's life, black and white photos of him laying track, cutting ribbons, shaking hands with mayors. And then, he arrived. Gavin Rhodes entered through the main glass doors like he was the returning king. He was wearing a navy blue suit that fit him with surgical precision, a blood-red tie, and a pair of cufflinks that probably cost more than my annual salary. He did not look like a thief. He looked like a statesman. He moved through the crowd, gripping elbows and patting backs. I watched him from behind a pillar, gripping the handle of my mop so hard my knuckles turned white. "So good to see you," he told the mayor, his voice booming with practiced warmth. "Yes, it is an emotional night. We just want to honor the old man right." He stopped to speak to a reporter, his face falling into a mask of solemn duty. "It has been a heavy burden, carrying this legacy alone," he said, looking wistfully at the banner. "But the family trust is committed to this city. It is what Henry would have wanted." I felt bile rise in my throat. I pushed my cart forward, the wheels squeaking against the terrazzo. A woman in a sequined dress stepped back to avoid me, wrinkling her nose without even looking at my face. "Excuse me," I murmured, sweeping up a dropped canapé. The lights in the concourse dimmed, leaving only the stage illuminated. The chairman of the transit authority, a man with a mustache that twitched when he spoke, stepped up to the podium. "Ladies and gentlemen," he announced, his voice echoing through the vaulted ceiling, "we are here to honor a visionary and to accept the generous endowment for the new memorial wing. Please welcome the man who has preserved and expanded the vision of Henry Gray for the new generation, the executor of the Gray estate, Mr. Gavin Rhodes." The applause was polite, rhythmic, and hollow. Gavin jogged up the steps to the stage, waving humbly. He adjusted the microphone, looked out over the crowd, and smiled. It was the smile of a man who believes he is untouchable. "Thank you," Gavin said. "Thank you all." He paused for effect, looking up at the giant portrait of Henry on the screen. "Integrity," he began. "That was the word Henry Gray lived by. He used to tell me, 'Gavin, a man is only as good as his word, and a rail line is only as good as its foundation.'" I was standing 20 feet to the left of the stage, near the technical booth. There was a secondary microphone stand there, used by the stage manager to coordinate with the sound team. It was live. I had checked it 10 minutes ago while emptying the trash bin next to the mixing board. Gavin continued, his voice gaining a tremulous, emotional quality. "When Henry passed, he left a hole in our hearts, and sadly, the Gray family tree had withered. With no direct descendants to carry the torch, the weight fell to me. It was a difficult decision to step away from my own career to manage the Rhodes Line Management Trust, but I did it for the family. I did it to protect the assets from being squandered. I looked at the sound technician, a young guy in a hoodie who was scrolling on his phone. He didn't even notice me. I stepped up to the mic. I remembered the cold of the metal bench on night 7. I remembered the taste of the crackers I rationed. I remembered the look on my mother's face when she realized she had sold me out. Gavin raised a hand, reaching the crescendo of his speech. "And so, tonight, we pledge to keep this station a beacon of honesty and—" I flipped the switch on the microphone. Scrah! A high-pitched whine of feedback tore through the speakers, slicing through the air like a knife. The audience flinched, covering their ears. Gavin froze mid-sentence, looking around in confusion. I leaned into the mic. My voice was calm, flat, and amplified to a volume that rattled the windows. "Apologies for the interruption," I said. "Before the sanitation team clears the floor for the reception, we have been instructed to play a memorial tribute, a clarification of the record, if you will." Every head in the room turned. They looked at the stage, then to the side. They saw a woman in a janitor's uniform, holding a microphone with one hand and resting the other on a trash cart. Gavin squinted, the spotlight blinding him. "Who is that? Is this a joke?" I nodded to the tech booth. Michael had a man inside. "Now, please," I said. The giant LED screen behind Gavin flickered. The image of Henry Gray vanished. In its place, a high-resolution scan of a handwritten letter appeared. It was magnified so that every jagged loop of Henry's handwriting was the size of a car. For Freya, my granddaughter. The screen read, "If you are reading this, it means someone has stolen your life." A ripple of confusion went through the crowd. I saw the mayor lean forward, squinting. Gavin turned around. He looked up at the screen, and for the first time, the confident mask cracked. His mouth opened, but no sound came out. The image on the screen changed. Now it showed two signatures side by side. On the left, a check signed by Elaine Turner in 1995. On the right, the renunciation of inheritance document. Bright red digital circles appeared around the signatures, highlighting the differences. The screen zoomed in on the shaky, forged lines of the second signature. I spoke again, my voice booming over the whispers of the crowd. "What you are looking at is a forensic analysis of a forgery." I said, "This signature was used 10 years ago to erase the existence of Henry Gray's daughter and his 2 grandchildren. It was used to divert the Gray Line Trust into a shell company." Gavin lunged toward the podium mic. "Cut the feed," he screamed. "Someone cut the damn feed." "This is a hack security." But the screen changed again. This time, it was a flowchart. It showed money moving from the Henry Gray estate to Harborview Heritage trustees, then to Rhodes Line Management, and finally, to a series of personal purchases. A photo of a bright red convertible appeared, then a photo of a vacation home in Aspen, the sole beneficiary of this fraud. I said, reading from the paper Michael had prepared for me, is the man standing on stage, Mr. Gavin Rhodes, who has paid himself a management fee of $150,000 a month for the last decade. The crowd gasped. It was a collective intake of breath that sucked the oxygen out of the room. $150,000 a month, in a city where the average factory worker made $40,000 a year. Gavin abandoned the podium. He jumped down from the stage, his face purple with rage. He did not look like a statesman anymore. He looked like a cornered animal. He marched toward me. "You little bitch," he shouted. "Forgetting the cameras. Forgetting the donors. You ungrateful, lying gutter rat. Turn it off." He raised his hand as if to grab me, or maybe strike me. I did not flinch. I did not move, because between me and Gavin, Rhodes stood Frank, the night shift security guard. Frank, who had given me the key to the locker. Frank, who had watched me sleep on the bench and never kicked me out. Frank stepped forward, his chest blocking Gavin's path. He put a heavy hand on Gavin's chest. "Back off, sir," Frank said. His voice was low, bored, and dangerous. "Get out of my way," Gavin spat, trying to push past him. "Do you know who I am? I run this place. That woman is a trespasser. She is a nobody." I stepped out from behind the cart. I took off the blue plastic name tag that said Freya. I dropped it into the trash bin. "I am not a nobody." "Gavin," I said into the microphone. The screen behind him changed one last time. A massive QR code appeared, black and white pixels 10 feet tall. Underneath it, the text read, "Civil Case 4099 B. Turner Vaz. Rhodes. Emergency Asset Freeze and Petition for Probate Fraud. Download full evidence." Here, I pointed at the screen. "I am the integrity trigger." I said. Every reporter in the room raised their phone. A sea of glowing screens lifted into the air, capturing the code. The flashes of cameras went off like strobe lights, blinding Gavin as he spun around, trying to shield his face. Gavin looked at the reporters, then back at me. He looked at my uniform. He looked at the mop. "You cleaned toilets," he hissed, his voice shaking. "You are nothing. No judge will believe a janitor over me." Suddenly, a voice rang out from the press pool. It was the financial correspondent from the regional channel. She had her phone in her hand, scrolling through the document she had just downloaded. "Mr. Rhodes," she shouted, "can you explain why the registered address for Rhodes Line Management in Delaware matches the billing address for the vehicle purchased for Liam Turner?" Gavin froze. The color drained from his face, leaving it a sickly gray. He opened his mouth, closed it, and looked around the room. He was searching for an exit, but he was surrounded by the very people he had invited to celebrate him. "Mr. Rhodes," another reporter shouted, "is it true that the plaintiff, Ms. Turner, has been an employee of this station while you were collecting management fees from her grandfather's estate?" Gavin looked at me. He looked at the floor, the same terrazzo floor I had polished 2 hours ago. He stood there, in his $5,000 suit, completely silent. I let go of the microphone. It made a dull thud as I set it down on the stand. I picked up my mop bucket. I rolled my cart forward, moving toward the center of the room, directly toward Gavin. The crowd parted for me. The sea of tuxedos and gowns split wide open for the woman in the gray polyester vest. I stopped the cart right in front of him. I looked him in the eye. "Excuse me, Mr. Rhodes," I said, my voice quiet now. "Just for him. You are standing in my workspace, and you are making a mess." Gavin Rhodes did not move. He could not move. He stood paralyzed on the spot where I used to sleep, stripped naked in front of the entire city, while the departure board above us finally, mercifully, stopped telling lies. The Harborview Probate Court was not designed for spectacles. It was a small, wood-paneled room intended for quiet disputes over Grandma's antique china or arguments about who inherited the family farm. But on Monday morning, Courtroom 3 was packed so tight that the bailiff had to station himself at the door to physically block the overflow of reporters. After the stunt at the train station, everyone wanted to see the janitor taking on the tycoon. I sat at the plaintiff's table next to Michael. He had bought me a suit, a simple charcoal blazer and trousers. It was the first time in my life I had worn something that had been tailored to fit me, rather than something I had fished out of a clearance bin. It felt like armor, across the aisle. Gavin Rhodes sat with a team of 3 lawyers. He looked tired. The bags under his eyes were heavy, and his skin had a gray, pasty quality that matched the overcast sky outside. He refused to look at me. He spent the entire morning staring at a watermark on the table, spinning a gold pen between his fingers. The presiding judge was Marion Holt. I had read about her over the weekend. She was 60 years old, had served for 15 years, and had a reputation for shredding lawyers who tried to use flowery language to hide dirty math. She peered over her spectacles as she took her seat. The silence in the room instant and absolute. "This is case number 4099B, Turner versus Rhodes," Judge Holt said. Her voice was dry and sharp, like paper being torn. "I have reviewed the initial filings. I have to say, in my 15 years on the bench, I have seen complex trusts, and I have seen bitter family feuds, but I have rarely seen a mess quite like this one." She looked directly at Michael. "Mr. Rowan, you are alleging that the current executor, Mr. Rhodes, is operating a fraudulent trust based on forged documents, and that your client, Ms. Turner, is the rightful heir under a clause called the integrity trigger. Is that correct?" "It is, Your Honor," Michael said, standing up, "and we are prepared to prove it." Michael did not waste time with theatrics. He went straight for the biology. "Exhibit A." "Your Honor," Michael said, handing a thick packet to the clerk. "DNA analysis conducted by Harborview Genetics Lab. It compares the genetic markers of Henry Gray, obtained from his preserved medical records, with those of the plaintiff, Freya Turner." He paused, letting the room hold its breath. "The probability of relatedness is 99.9%. Freya Turner is the biological granddaughter of Henry Gray. There is no ambiguity." Judge Holt flipped through the report. She nodded once. "Mr. Sterling?" she asked, looking at Gavin's lead attorney. A man with hair so stiff it looked like a helmet. "Do you dispute the DNA?" Sterling stood up. He was smooth, oily, and smiling a smile that did not reach his eyes. "We do not dispute that Ms. Turner shares genetic material with the late Mr. Gray, Your Honor. However, biology is not destiny, and it is certainly not a legal claim. A grandchild can be disinherited, and in this case, the entire Gray lineage was severed by her mother. Elaine, Michael was ready for that. "Exhibit B," he announced. The contents of the metal box recovered from Elaine Turner's residence. He laid out the birth certificates, the old one, listing Henry Gray as the grandfather, and then he laid out the letters, the ones Elaine had written but never sent. "Your Honor," Michael said, "the defense claims Elaine Turner wanted nothing to do with her father. These letters paint a different picture, a picture of a woman who was ashamed, yes, scared, yes, but one who was desperate to reconnect. She writes here, dated 1998, that she wants to bring her daughter home. Sterling jumped up. Objection. Hearsay. These letters were never sent. They are the scribblings of a troubled woman. They go to state of mind. Judge Holt ruled, overruled. Continue. Mr. Rowan. Michael signaled to the back of the room. We call Dr. Aris to the stand. Doctor. Aris walked up, carrying a large display board. He set it on an easel facing the judge. It was the same comparison the world had seen on the LED screen at the station, but more detailed. Dr. Aris, Michael asked, you have examined the signature on the renunciation of inheritance document dated 10 years ago. I have, Dr. Aris said. And what is your conclusion, Dr. Aris pointed to the magnified image of the signature. This signature is a simulation, he said. If you look at the tremor in the downward strokes, it is rhythmic. It is too consistent. A natural tremor, caused by age or nerves, is chaotic. This tremor was drawn. Someone was trying to make the hand look weak, to mimic the signature of an elderly or distressed person. Furthermore, the pen pressure is heavy and even throughout. A person signing under distress usually has variable pressure. This was signed by a steady hand pretending to be a shaking one. He looked at Gavin. It is my professional opinion that this signature is a forgery, likely traced from an earlier document and manipulated. Sterling cross-examined him for 20 minutes, trying to confuse the issue with talk of ink composition and paper age. But Dr. Aris did not budge. The damage was done. The judge was looking at the renunciation document with a deep, focused frown. Then, it was Sterling's turn to present the defense. Your Honor, he began, walking toward the jury box. Even though there was no jury, the plaintiff is painting a conspiracy theory. But the truth is sadder and simpler. Elaine Turner was a woman with severe mental health struggles. Henry Gray was a hard man who cut her off. When Henry died, Elaine was terrified of the debt and the responsibility. She begged Mr. Rhodes to take it. He gestured to Gavin, who managed to look pitiable. Mr. Rhodes stepped in when no one else would. He created the management trust to protect the assets from being seized by creditors. He has dedicated 10 years of his life to preserving the Gray legacy. And now, a woman who has been estranged from the family for decades, a woman with a history of financial instability, appears out of nowhere claiming a fortune. He turned to me. We call Freya Turner to the stand. I walked to the witness box. My legs felt heavy, but my head was clear. I swore to tell the truth. Ms. Turner, Sterling said, leaning on the podium. Is it true you were evicted from your apartment 2 weeks ago? Yes, I said. Is it true you have substantial debts? Yes. Is it true you signed a waiver in the hospital 10 years ago, assigning your rights to the Rhodes Trust? I took a breath. I was 19. I said, my appendix had burst. I was on morphine. My mother told me it was an insurance form. I did not know I had any rights to assign. I did not know I had a grandfather. Sterling smiled. So you admit you signed it. I admit I was tricked. I said, just like I was tricked into thinking I had no family. Sterling pushed harder. You claim you are the heir. But you have never met Henry Gray. You never visited him. You never sent him a card. You were a stranger to him. I looked at Gavin. He was smirking slightly. I did not know he existed. I said, my voice rising, my mother cut me out of family photos because I did not fit the frame. She tore up his postcards. I was not a stranger by choice. I was a stranger by theft. Judge Holt leaned forward. Ms. Turner, she said, let us talk about the last 2 weeks. Where have you been living? I looked at the judge. I decided to tell the truth. Not the polished version Michael might have wanted, but the raw truth. I have been living at Riverbridge Central Station, Your Honor. I said. The judge raised an eyebrow. In the employee quarters. No, ma'am, I said. On the bench in the Sector B. Under the security camera. A murmur went through the room. I slept with my backpack under my head. I continued. I woke up every hour when the announcements played. I washed my face in the sink of the bathroom I had just cleaned. I ate crackers from the vending machine. Why, Judge Holt asked, why not a shelter? Because I had a job. I said, and I could not risk missing a shift. If I went to a shelter, I might not get back in time. I needed the money. I needed to pay off the debts my mother incurred. Judge Holt stared at me for a long moment. Her expression softened. Just a fraction. You kept working, she said. Even when you were homeless. Yes, I said. It is the only thing I know how to do. She turned to Michael. Mr. Rowan, let us discuss this integrity trigger. The will states the heir must be engaged in self-sustaining labor. Michael stood up. Yes, Your Honor. We have submitted Ms. Turner's employment records. He handed another stack of papers to the bailiff. These are tax returns and pay stubs for the last 3 years. Michael said, Ms. Turner has worked as a warehouse packer, a roof repair assistant, and currently as a sanitation and maintenance worker. She has averaged between 50 and 60 hours a week. Judge Holt put on her glasses and looked at the numbers. Her annual income, the judge asked. It fluctuates, Your Honor, Michael said, but it averages between $22,000 and $26,000 a year. The judge nodded slowly. She looked at the papers. Then she looked at Gavin Rhodes. And Mr. Rhodes, she said, her voice turning frosty. I have reviewed the financials for the Rhodes Line Management Trust. Can you tell me what the monthly management fee is? Sterling stood up quickly. Your Honor, standard executive compensation packages are... Sit down. Mr. Sterling, Judge Holt snapped. She did not look away from Gavin. I asked Mr. Rhodes. Gavin stood up. He tugged at his collar. It varies, Your Honor, he said, his voice tight. Based on performance benchmarks, the average, Mr. Rhodes, Judge Holt said, it is approximately $150,000, Gavin whispered. Per year, the judge asked. Though she knew the answer. Per month, Gavin said. The silence in the courtroom was deafening. $150,000 a month, Judge Holt repeated. She looked at me, then back at Gavin. So, Mr. Rhodes, you are telling me that you pay yourself more in 5 days than this young woman earns in an entire year of scrubbing floors. Gavin opened his mouth, but the judge cut him off. And you used these funds to purchase a $55,000 sports car for a student who does not work, while the rightful heir was sleeping on a bench in the train station her grandfather built. It was a consulting expense, Gavin stammered, for networking. Judge Holt took off her glasses and set them on the bench. The sound was like a gunshot. Grotesque, she said. She looked at the files spread out before her. This court has seen greed, Mr. Rhodes. But rarely has it seen such an imbalance of effort and reward. You have taken a legacy built on steel and sweat and turned it into a personal slush fund. She looked at the clock on the wall. However, she said, her voice regaining its professional detachment, the law is not decided by disgust. It is decided by documents. The defense has raised significant questions regarding the validity of the original trust structure and the mental state of Elaine Turner. I need to review the original charter of Gray Rail and Freight to see if the integrity trigger clause is indeed binding over the rights of an appointed executor. She banged her gavel once. I am adjourning this hearing for 24 hours. I want the original, certified charter on my desk by 8 tomorrow morning. I will issue my ruling on the asset freeze and the executorship tomorrow afternoon. Court is adjourned, the bailiff yelled. All rise. I stood up, my legs shaking. It wasn't the victory I had hoped for. It was a pause, a suspension. I walked out of the courtroom with Michael. The reporters were shouting questions, but we pushed past them into the hallway. She hates him. I said to Michael, you saw her face. She called it grotesque. Why didn't she just rule because she's a good judge? Michael said, she knows Gavin will appeal. If she rules on a motion, the appellate court will overturn it. She needs to find the legal nail to seal his coffin. She needs to be sure that the integrity trigger is bulletproof. I leaned against the marble wall. I felt drained. If my grandfather wanted a worker to inherit his money, I said, why did he make it so hard? Why the riddles? Why the lockers? Why not just leave me the money? Michael put his files into his briefcase. He looked at me with a strange expression. Because Henry did not trust money. Freya, he said. He trusted struggle. He believed that if you gave a person a fortune they did not earn, you destroyed them. He wanted to make sure that whoever got it had already survived without it. He checked his watch. Go back to the hotel. Freya, get some sleep. Tomorrow. We have to find that charter. Wait, I said, you don't have the charter. We have a copy, Michael said. But the judge asked for the original, the one with the wet ink, the one that proves the intent wasn't just a draft. And where is it, I asked. Michael sighed. That is the question. It wasn't in the safe at the firm. Henry liked to keep his most important things close to his work. His work, I repeated. My mind flashed back to the station, to the secret spaces I knew better than anyone, the maintenance closets, the crawl spaces. I looked at Michael. Henry Gray never did anything simple. Did he? Never. Michael said. I stood up straight. I think I know where he hid it. I said. Michael looked surprised. You do? He hid the key in a locker for 20 years. I said. He hid the will in a trust. If there is one thing I learned about this station in 11 nights, it is that there are places nobody looks because they are too dirty. I buttoned my blazer. I'm going back to Riverbridge. Michael, I'm going to find that charter, but you are off the clock. Michael said, I am the heir. I said, I am never off the clock. I turned and walked toward the exit. The trial was paused, but the scavenger hunt was just beginning, and I knew exactly which dirty corner to check first. The hotel room in Harborview was stiflingly warm, a sharp contrast to the drafty courtroom we had just left. Michael sat in an armchair, loosening his tie, looking less like a shark and more like a tired old man. We had hit a wall. Judge Holt wanted the original charter, the one with the wet ink, the one that proved the integrity trigger wasn't just a draft clause but the founding philosophy of the company, and we did not have it. I paced the room, my mind racing. He must have kept it somewhere, I said. A safety deposit box. A lawyer's vault. Michael shook his head. He took a sip of lukewarm water. Henry Gray did not trust banks. Freya. He used to say that a bank vault was just a hole in the wall owned by someone else. He liked to keep his things where he could see them, or rather, where he knew they were, but no one else would think to look. He chuckled, a dry, humorless sound. I remember once, back in the 1990s, we lost the deed to a warehouse in Chicago. Panic ensued. We tore the office apart. Henry just watched us, amused. Finally, he walked into the executive bathroom, reached under the P-trap of the sink, and pulled out a taped plastic bag. I stopped pacing. Under the sink, Michael nodded. He told me, Michael, nobody ever looks under the sink. People are too proud to bend down and look at the plumbing. They do not want to see where the dirt goes. The words hit me like a physical shove. Too proud to bend down. Where the dirt goes. My mind flashed back to Riverbridge Central Station. I thought about the miles of piping, the dark corners, the service corridors that ran like arteries behind the clean, marble skin of the concourse. I thought about the places I had cleaned for the last 2 weeks, the places where I scraped gum, wiped grime, and collected the things people discarded. Henry Gray built that station. He designed the ventilation. He funded the construction. It was his monument. If he wanted to hide the heart of his company, I said slowly, half to myself, he wouldn't put it in a bank. He would put it in the machine. I looked at Michael. He put the key in the locker because he knew a wanderer might find it. But the charter is the foundation. He would put that somewhere only a worker would find. Michael looked at me, confused. What are you talking about? I grabbed my coat. I need to go back to Riverbridge. I said, tonight. But the judge gave us 24 hours, I interrupted. I can catch the red-eye flight to the regional airport and take a cab. I can be at the station by 3 a.m. That is right in the middle of my shift. Freya, you cannot just wander around searching. It is a massive building. I am not wandering. Michael, I said, pulling the door open, I know exactly where to look. I know the one place in that entire station that is critical to the operation, but completely invisible to the executives, the one place where you have to kneel to do your job. I did not wait for his permission. I ran for the elevator. The flight was a blur of dark turbulence and anxious energy. I landed at 2:30 in the morning, and by 3 o'clock, I was standing at the employee entrance of River Bridge Central. My badge still worked. The green light on the reader beeped, a cheerful sound that felt like a welcome home. I went to the locker room and changed. I took off the tailored suit Michael had bought me and pulled on my gray uniform. It smelled of sweat and detergent. It felt real. I clipped my ID to my chest. I was no longer the plaintiff in a multi-million-dollar lawsuit. I was Freya, the night shift cleaner. I grabbed a cart and headed for the technical wing. This part of the station was off-limits to the public. It was a maze of concrete corridors housing the server rooms, the HVAC controls, and the break rooms for the engineers. It was quiet here. The only sound, the low, constant hum of the transformers. There was a women's restroom at the end of the hall. It was almost never used. There were only 2 female engineers on the night staff, and they usually used the facilities near the main control room, but the cleaning schedule mandated that it be serviced every night. I hated this room. It was cold. The tiles were an ugly shade of institutional green, and the water pressure was terrible. But as I pushed my cart inside, I looked at it with new eyes. I locked the door from the inside and put up the cleaning in progress sign. I started with the sinks. I lay on my back on the cold tile, shining my flashlight up into the porcelain underbelly of the basins. Nothing but rust and pipe sealant. I checked behind the toilets. I checked inside the tanks. Nothing. I moved to the mirrors. I ran my fingers along the top of the frames, feeling for a loose catch or a hidden envelope. Dust. Just years of dust. Panic started to creep in. Maybe I was wrong. Maybe Michael was just telling an old war story. Maybe the charter was lost, or destroyed, or sitting in a landfill in New Jersey. I stood in the middle of the room, breathing hard. Think, Freya, think like a cleaner. Where is the one place you have to touch? But nobody else does. My eyes landed on the paper towel dispenser. It was a heavy stainless steel unit bolted to the wall. It was old, probably original to the station. Every night, I had to unlock the front panel to refill the stack of brown paper towels. I walked over to it. I unlocked the faceplate, and it swung down. I loaded a fresh stack of towels, just out of habit. Then I looked at the space behind the towels. It was just the metal back of the casing, screwed into the wall, but there was a gap between the metal casing of the dispenser and the tile wall. There was a shadow. It was maybe 1/4 of an inch. You would never see it unless you were standing with your cheek pressed against the wall, trying to wipe down the side of the unit, or unless you were removing the unit to fix it. I grabbed a screwdriver from my tool belt. My hands were shaking. I undid the 4 heavy screws that held the dispenser to the wall. They were stiff, rusted tight, but I put my weight into it, one by one. They groaned and gave way. I pulled the heavy metal box away from the wall. There, taped to the back of the dispenser with heavy-duty black electrical tape, was a small, flat package. My heart stopped. I peeled the tape back. It was a heavy plastic Ziploc bag, covered in a layer of grime that had accumulated over 20 years. I wiped it off with my sleeve. Inside were 2 things. The first was a key. It was a strange, cylindrical key, unlike any I had seen for a door or a locker. It looked like the kind of key used for high-security server racks or industrial machinery. The second was a plastic ID card. It was old, faded yellow. It bore the logo, Gray Rail Technical Services. The name on the card was simply H. Gray, and the title was Chief Engineer. I held the key in my palm. It was cold and heavy. I knew where this went. I put the dispenser back on the wall, driving the screws in halfway, just enough to hold it. I gathered my tools and ran out of the restroom. I sprinted down the corridor to the door marked Engineers Only, Authorized Personnel. My cleaning badge opened this door. 2. Inside, the room was filled with rows of blinking lights, the brains of the station. It smelled of ozone and hot plastic. I went to the far wall, where the legacy equipment was kept. There was a bank of small gray metal cabinets that looked like old modem housing units. They were obsolete, dusty, and completely ignored by the modern tech staff. I looked for the cabinet labeled with the serial number that matched the ID card, HG001. It was in the bottom row, near the floor. Of course, you had to kneel to get to it. I knelt on the concrete. I inserted the cylindrical key into the small lock on the face of the cabinet. It turned with a smooth, satisfying click. The front panel of the cabinet popped open. It was not a modem bank. It was a small, fireproof safe disguised as IT equipment. Inside lay a rectangular metal box, the kind used for safety deposits, but smaller. And resting on top of it was a letter. I pulled the box and the letter out. My hands were trembling so hard I almost dropped them. I sat back on my heels. Right there on the floor of the server room, I opened the letter first. It was written on thick, cream-colored stationery, the same paper as the note in the locker. To the grandchild I do not know yet. If you have found this, it means you are working here. Not just walking through, not just inspecting, but working. I hid the key in the bathroom because executive hands are too soft to touch cold steel and porcelain. I hid the safe in the engine room because lawyers do not like the noise of the machines. To find this, you had to be someone who knows the body of this building. You had to be someone who cleans up the mess. This is my philosophy, and this is my test. A leader who does not understand the sweat of the laborer is a parasite. If you are reading this, you have passed the integrity trigger not because of a legal clause, but because of your actions. Inside this box is the original charter of Gray Rail and Freight. It contains the unalterable bylaws of the company. It states that the company must remain in the hands of a working heir. It also contains my personal journals, documenting my refusal to let Gavin Rhodes near the structure of my legacy. I lost my daughter to my own stubbornness. I pray I do not lose you. Take this back to the light. Take your name back. Grandfather. Tears pricked my eyes. Hot and sudden. I wiped them away with the back of my dirty glove. I opened the metal box. Inside was a silver USB drive, heavy and solid, with the word integrity engraved into the casing. Next to it was a bound leather book, the journal, and underneath that, a thick sheaf of papers with a wax seal that had cracked with age but was still intact, the charter. I held the box to my chest. I closed my eyes and listened to the station. I could hear the distant rumble of a freight train passing on the outer tracks. I could hear the hum of the servers. I could hear the water rushing through the pipes in the walls. For the first time in my life, I did not feel like a piece of debris caught in the current. I felt like the anchor. Henry Gray hadn't just left me money. He had left me a map. He had guided me from the bench to the locker, from the locker to the lawyer, and from the lawyer back to the floor where I started. He had made sure that by the time I held his legacy, I would understand exactly what it weighed. I stood up. I put the box in my cleaning cart, burying it under a pile of clean rags. I walked out of the server room, locking the door behind me. The corridor was empty. It was 4 a.m. The first commuter train would be arriving in an hour. I pushed my cart down the hall, the wheels clattering rhythmically. I stopped at a window looking out over the tracks. Snow was falling outside, swirling in the cones of light from the signal towers. I am not invisible. I whispered to the glass. I am the one who holds the keys. I went back to the locker room. I packed the metal box into my backpack, wrapping it in my work vest. I changed back into my street clothes, but I kept the boots on. They felt better than the dress shoes. I walked out of the employee entrance and into the biting wind of the early morning. I hailed a cab to the airport. I had a flight to catch. When I walked back into the courtroom in Harborview later that morning, I would not just be bringing paper, I would be bringing the voice of the dead. And I had a feeling that Gavin Rhodes was not going to like what Henry had to say. I clutched the bag to my chest as the cab pulled away. The USB drive felt warm against my ribs. You did not find your daughter. Henry, I thought, but you found me, and I'm not going to let you down. I watched the station fade into the distance behind me, a glowing island in the dark. It wasn't just a place to sleep anymore. It was mine, and soon, everyone in that courtroom was going to know it. Back at the offices of Pierce and Lockwood, the atmosphere was surgical. We were not just looking at files. We were performing an autopsy on a decade of lies. Michael had assembled his technical team in the secure conference room. The silver USB drive, still cold from the unheated server room at Riverbridge, sat plugged into a forensic laptop. Sarah, the lead forensic accountant, initiated a cryptographic hash function. She explained that this would create a digital fingerprint of the drive's contents, proving in court that not a single byte had been altered since Henry Gray last saved a file. We watched the progress bar load. When it hit 100%, the room let out a collective breath. The drive contained 3 folders: Charter Original, Journals, Personal. Michael opened the Charter first. It was a high-resolution scan of a document dated 30 years ago. We read the bylaws together on the main screen. The language was dense, but Clause 19 was as clear as day. In the event of the refusal, incapacity, or death of the primary beneficiary, the entirety of the Gray Line assets shall bypass any intermediate holding trusts and transfer directly to the eldest living descendant by blood, provided said descendant meets the criteria of the integrity trigger. No third-party management entity shall have the authority to liquidate, leverage, or siphon assets during this transition. Michael slammed his hand on the table. A rare display of excitement. "This kills the Rhodes Trust," he said. "It kills it dead." Gavin's legal argument relies on the idea that the estate needed a manager because there was no qualified heir, but the charter says the transfer is automatic. Rhodes Line management was never legal. Every dime he took was theft, not a fee. Next, we opened the journals. These were digitized pages of Henry's diary. They were a chronicle of frustration. I read an entry from 12 years ago. Gavin came by again today. He was wearing a suit that cost more than my first house. He talked about tax optimization. He talked about offshore leverage. I told him that money is like manure. If you pile it up, it stinks. But if you spread it around, it makes things grow. He looked at me like I was speaking a foreign language. The man smells the grease of the engine, but he has never touched it. He is a parasite waiting for the host to die. I felt a grim satisfaction. My grandfather had seen right through him. Then, Michael opened the folder marked Personal. My breath hitched. The first file was a photograph. It was grainy, taken with an old film camera, but the subjects were clear. It was inside a freight train car. My mother, Elaine, was young, her hair wild and curly, laughing with her head thrown back. On her lap sat a toddler in denim overalls. Me? I stared at the screen. I had never seen a photo of us like this, in our house in Milford. The photos were staged, stiff, and I was usually cropped out. Here, I was the center of the joy. We looked happy. We looked like we belonged on that train. "Play the video," I whispered. Sarah clicked on a video file. It was only 30 seconds long. The camera shook slightly, then settled on Henry Gray's face. He looked older than in the portraits, his skin papery, but his eyes were fierce. He was sitting in his office at the station. "Hello," he said. The voice was gravelly, deep, and familiar, though I had never heard it. "I am recording this because my lawyers tell me I need to be specific. They say the integrity trigger sounds cruel. They say I'm making my heir jump through hoops." He leaned into the camera. "It is not a test. It is just my way of saying hello. If you are watching this, and you are working for a living, then you know what I know. You know that the world is built by the people who show up when it is cold and dark. If you are still going to work when I am dead, then I have found the right person. Do not let the suits take it from you. It is yours. You earned it before you even knew it was there." The video cut to black. The room was silent. I wiped a tear from my cheek. He hadn't been testing me to be mean. He had been inoculating me against people like Gavin. "We file," Michael said, his voice thick with emotion. "We file a motion to admit new evidence immediately. We ask the judge to unseal this drive. Within 2 hours, the motion was filed, and within 3 hours, the war began. Gavin Rhodes did not have the truth, but he had a PR firm on retainer. By noon, the headlines started popping up on the local news sites and social media. Janitor scam sanitation worker accused of staging inheritance fraud. Sources say Freya Turner exploited elderly grandfather's dementia. The $400 million mop. How a homeless woman is trying to hijack a legacy. I sat in the office, scrolling through the comments on my phone. She looks like a junkie, one comment said. Probably faked the documents, said another. Get a real job, said a third. They were tearing me apart. They were taking the very thing I was proud of my survival and twisting it into something ugly. Michael snatched the phone from my hand. Do not read that, he ordered. This is their strategy. They want to shame you into settling. They want you to feel small so you will take a payout and disappear. He looked at his team. We are not going to play defense. We are going to play offense. Vance, get the scanner. We spent the next hour scanning every single document I had saved. My pay stubs from the supermarket, my tax returns showing an income of $22,000, my student loan statements, the foreclosure notice on my mother's house. We sent them all to the Harborview Gazette and the National Post. Michael dictated the statement while Gavin Rhodes was buying a $55,000 convertible with estate funds. The rightful heir was paying taxes on minimum wage. Here are the receipts. Who do you believe? By 4 p.m, the narrative began to shift. The internet loves an underdog, and the sheer volume of my paperwork was undeniable. People started posting side-by-side comparisons of Gavin's suit and my work boots. The hashtag Janitor Heiress started trending, not as an insult, but as a rallying cry. My phone rang. It was a number I did not recognize. I answered it on speaker. Freya. It was Elaine. Her voice was shaking so hard, I could barely understand her. I need to see you, she said. Please, just us. No lawyers. I looked at Michael. He nodded, but he scribbled a note on a pad. Public place. Cameras. Meet me at the Harborview station, I said, the security checkpoint on the upper level. 5 o'clock. I am not meeting you in a coffee shop. Mom, I added, I am meeting you on my turf. When I arrived at the station, Elaine was standing near the metal detectors. She looked small. She was wearing a coat that was too thin for the weather. She saw me and took a step forward, her arms opening for a hug. I did not move. I stood with my hands in my pockets. She stopped, her arms dropping to her sides. She looked at my face and saw that the door was closed. I brought you this, she said. She reached into her purse and pulled out a crumpled envelope. It was old. The postmark was from 15 years ago. I kept it, she whispered. I hid it from Gavin. He told me to burn everything Henry sent, but I couldn't burn this one. I took the letter. I opened it. It was short. Elaine, the table is set. It is always set. Come home and bring my granddaughter. I do not care about the past. I just want to know the future. I stared at the words. The table is set. You told me he hated us, I said, looking up at her. You told me he would slam the door in our faces. I was scared. Freya, she cried. Gavin said Henry was angry. He said if we went back, Henry would sue us for the tuition money he had sent years ago. Gavin said he was the only one who could protect us. He was protecting his cash cow. Mom, I said coldly. And you let him. You let him because it was easier to be a victim than to be a daughter. Elaine began to weep. Ugly. Heaving sobs that drew stares from the commuters. I am so sorry. Freya, I ruined everything. Is it too late? Can we fix it? I looked at her. I felt a pang of pity, but it was distant. I had spent too many nights freezing on a bench to be melted by tears now. I cannot fix you, Mom, I said, and I am not going to hug you and tell you it is okay, because it is not okay. I pointed to the security cameras above us. But you can fix one thing. Tomorrow morning, we go back to court. If you get on that stand and you tell the judge exactly what is in this letter and exactly what Gavin told you to do, then that will be the first time in your life you have signed your name to the truth. Elaine wiped her face. She looked at the letter in my hand. He will destroy me, she whispered. He already did. Mom, I said, I am just offering you a chance to dig yourself out. I turned and walked away. I did not look back. I returned to the law office at 6. Michael was on the phone, his face unreadable. He held up a hand, signaling me to wait. He listened for a long time. simply saying, "I see. And is that your final offer?" He hung up. He looked at me. That was Sterling, Gavin's lead counsel. And I asked, "They know about the USB," Michael said. "They know about the charter. They know they are going to lose on the merits, so they are trying to buy their way out." He picked up a piece of paper and wrote a number on it. He slid it across the table. $200 million. They are offering a settlement, Michael said. A 50-50 split of the estate. Gavin keeps half. You get half. I stared at the number. $200 million. It was a number so large it felt abstract. It was enough to buy an island. It was enough to never work again. It was enough to forget the cold bench, the smell of bleach, the humiliation. "What are the terms?" I asked. Michael sighed. "That is the catch. You sign a non-disclosure agreement. You admit no wrongdoing on Gavin's part. We seal the court records. We withdraw the fraud allegations. And we do not refer the case to the district attorney for criminal prosecution. Gavin walks away with his half, his reputation intact, and no jail time." I sat back in the chair. $200 million to let him go. I said, to let him keep driving that car, to let him keep pretending he is a pillar of the community. It is a lot of money. "Freya," Michael said softly, "it is a guaranteed win. If we go to trial, anything can happen. Juries are unpredictable. Appeals can take years. This is money in your account tomorrow." I closed my eyes. I thought about the 11 nights. I thought about the cold. I thought about the other cleaners at the station. People like Frank and Maria, who worked double shifts and still couldn't afford a car. I thought about Henry Gray. Money is like manure. If I take this, I thought, I am just another person who can be bought. I am just proving Gavin right. He thinks everyone has a price. He thinks integrity is just a negotiating tactic. I remembered the moldy sandwich I had eaten from the trash bin because I was too proud to beg. It had made me sick, but it had kept me alive. I opened my eyes. "No," I said. Michael did not blink. "Are you sure it is a risk?" I stood up and walked to the window. I looked out at the city lights. Somewhere out there, a train was moving along a track my grandfather built. "I do not want half a moldy cake." "Michael," I said, "I do not want his money if it means I have to shake his hand and promise to keep his secrets." I turned back to him. He stole 10 years of my life. He stole my mother's sanity. He stole my name. You cannot put a price tag on that. I want my name back. I want the name Gray to mean something again. I pointed at the USB drive on the table. "We have the truth. We have the proof. Why should we settle? Because it is the safe play," Michael said. I laughed. It was a sharp, short sound. I slept under a security camera for 2 weeks because I didn't have a lock on my door. I am done playing it safe. I want him to lose. I want him to stand in front of a judge and admit what he did. I want the world to see that the janitor took down the CEO. I leaned over the table. "Tell Sterling the answer is no. Tell him I want everything, every single penny, and I want his client in handcuffs." Michael looked at me for a long moment. Then, slowly, a smile spread across his face. It was not his usual polite lawyer smile. It was a genuine, predatory grin. He looked like a general who had just realized his soldier was ready for the front line. He picked up the phone. He didn't dial immediately. He just looked at me. "You are definitely a Gray," he said. Henry would have said the exact same thing. He dialed the number. "Sterling," Michael said into the receiver. "We have considered your offer. My client has instructed me to tell you that she is not interested in a settlement." He paused, listening to the shouting on the other end. "No," Michael said calmly. "We are not negotiating. We are going to convict. See you in court." He hung up the phone. The click echoed in the silent room. "Get some sleep." "Freya," Michael said. "Tomorrow, we finish this." The courtroom was no longer a place of quiet deliberation. It had become a theater, and the tickets were sold out. After Michael filed the motion to unseal the USB drive, the news had spread through Harborview like a virus. The benches were packed shoulder to shoulder with reporters, curious citizens, and former employees of Gray Rail who had heard the rumors about the janitor who took down the king. I sat at the plaintiff's table, my hands clasped tightly in my lap. To my right, Michael looked calm, like a surgeon preparing for a routine procedure. To my left, the evidence table was piled high with the physical remnants of my investigation: the metal box, the journals, the pay stubs, and the silver USB drive plugged into the court's presentation system. Judge Holt entered the room. She did not look at the crowd. She looked directly at the screen. "Bailiff," she said, her voice cutting through the murmur of the crowd. "Play the video." The lights dimmed. On the screen, the face of Henry Gray appeared. He was sitting in his office, the very office Gavin had occupied for 10 years. The video was grainy, but Henry's eyes were sharp. "If you are watching this," Henry's voice rumbled through the speakers, "and you are working for a living, then you know what I know. You know that the world is built by the people who show up when it is cold and dark." I watched Gavin Rhodes. He was staring at the screen, his face pale. He was watching the ghost of the man he had robbed come back to haunt him. "If you are still going to work when I am dead, then I have found the right person. Do not let the suits take it from you." The video ended. The silence in the room was absolute. Judge Holt turned to Gavin's legal team. "Mr. Sterling," she said, "you argued yesterday that the Rhodes Line Management Trust was established because Henry Gray's intentions were ambiguous. You argued that there was no clear instruction for succession." She pointed at the frozen image of Henry on the screen. "That looked fairly specific to me." "Mr. Sterling?" Sterling stood up, tugging at his collar. "Your Honor, this is a digital file. Its provenance is authenticated by a cryptographic hash that proves it has not been altered since the date of creation." Michael interrupted smoothly. "It matches the timestamp on the original charter found in the safe." Judge Holt nodded. "Mr. Sterling, the charter clearly states that in the event of a beneficiary failure, the assets transfer to the next of kin who meets the labor requirement. Why does your client's trust exist? Why was the estate not transferred to the grandchildren?" Sterling stammered. "There were administrative complexities. The previous legal counsel advised Mr. Rhodes that administrative complexities." Judge Holt repeated. "Is that what we are calling fraud today?" She turned to the witness stand. "Call Elaine Turner," she ordered. My mother stood up from the gallery. She looked terrifyingly fragile. She walked to the stand, her hand trembling as she swore on the Bible. I watched her, my heart aching. This was the woman who had erased me, but she was also the woman who had saved the letter. Mr. Sterling approached her like a wolf circling a wounded deer. "Mrs. Turner," he began, his voice smooth. "Let us be clear. You left home at 20. You were unstable. You cut off contact with your father. Is it not true that you asked Mr. Rhodes to help you because you were incapable of managing your own affairs?" Elaine looked down at her hands. "I was scared," she whispered. "Scared," Sterling repeated. "Exactly. You were overwhelmed, and you signed the renunciation of inheritance because you knew you could not handle the pressure. You voluntarily gave up your claim." "Objection," Michael said, leading the witness. "Sustained," Holt said, but she leaned forward. "Mrs. Turner, I want to hear it from you. Why did you sign that document?" Elaine looked up. She looked at me, then she looked at Gavin. Gavin's eyes were boring into her, a silent threat. I could see the fear rising in her throat. "This is not a family therapy session." "Mrs. Turner," Judge Holt said sharply, "this is a court of law. Speak up." Elaine took a deep breath. "Henry never said he would disown me," she said, her voice shaking but gaining volume. "I thought he did, but he didn't. I received a letter. He invited me back. He told me to bring Freya." A murmur went through the crowd. "And why didn't you go?" Holt asked. "Because Gavin came to my house," Elaine said. She pointed a shaking finger at the defense table. "He came to Milford. He told me that Henry was furious. He told me that if I tried to claim anything, he would use his lawyers to prove I was mentally incompetent. He said he would take Freya away from me. He said I would end up in a state hospital and my children would go to foster care." Gavin slammed his hand on the table. "That is a lie." "Sit down. Mr. Rhodes," Judge Holt shouted. Elaine continued, tears streaming down her face. He told me the only way to protect my children was to sign over control. He said he would give me an allowance. He said he would take care of Liam. He said Freya. He said Freya was tough. She could fend for herself. Sterling jumped in. Mrs. Turner, you admit you signed over control. You signed the papers. Perhaps you simply do not remember signing the renunciation. It was 10 years ago. Memory fades. You signed everything else, didn't you? He was trying to gaslight her. He was trying to make her doubt her own mind. Elaine stopped crying. She looked at Sterling with a sudden, fierce clarity. I signed the management agreement, she said. I signed the non-disclosure forms. I signed the checks he brought me. I signed every single piece of paper he put in front of me because I was a coward and I wanted to keep my son safe. She took a breath that seemed to suck all the air out of the room, but I never signed the paper that disowned my father. She looked straight at Judge Holt. I loved my father, Your Honor. I ran away, but I never wanted to erase him. That signature on the renunciation document, the one with the shaky hand, that is not mine. I did not sign it. The courtroom erupted. Reporters were typing furiously. This was the kill shot, the testimony of the victim confirming the science of the forgery. Order. Judge Holt banged her gavel. Order. She looked at Gavin Rhodes. Her expression was one of pure disgust. The witness has stated under oath that the signature is a forgery. Holt said, This corroborates the expert testimony of Dr. Aris. Michael stood up. We have one final piece of evidence, Your Honor, he said. He pulled a piece of paper from a folder. This is an internal email retrieved from the servers of Rhodes Line Management during discovery yesterday afternoon. It was sent from Gavin Rhodes to his personal accountant 5 years ago. Michael handed the paper to the bailiff, who brought it to the judge. Judge Holt put on her glasses. She read the email silently. Then she read it again. Her face turned to stone. Read it for the record. Mr. Rowan, she said. Michael read aloud. Subject the girl. Body. Make sure the monthly stipend stays under the radar. We cannot have any direct link to Milford. And remember, do not let the Turner girl appear in any official filing. As far as the state of Delaware is concerned, she does not exist. Legally, she is a ghost. Keep it that way. Legally, she is a ghost. Michael repeated. He turned to the gallery. My client was not a ghost, Your Honor. She was sleeping on a bench in the train station this man was robbing. Sterling stood up, but he looked defeated. His shoulders were slumped. Your Honor, he said weakly, in light of this new context, my client would like to request a recess to discuss a potential plea regarding the civil liability. We might be open to a settlement. Judge Holt looked at him over her spectacles. A settlement, she asked. Mr. Sterling, we are long past the point of settlements. The nature of this fraud is not just financial, it is existential. Your client attempted to erase a human being. She gathered her papers. I do not need a recess. I have heard enough. She looked at Gavin Rhodes. Mr. Rhodes, please stand. Gavin stood. He was trembling now. The arrogance was gone, replaced by the terror of a man watching the walls close in. This court finds that the plaintiff, Freya Turner, has satisfied the conditions of the integrity trigger established by the late Henry Gray. Judge Holt announced. Her employment history, verified by tax records and testimony, proves she is self-sustaining and industrious. She paused. Furthermore, this court finds that the renunciation of inheritance document is a forgery. Therefore, the Rhodes Line Management Trust was established on a fraudulent premise and is hereby void ab initio. It never legally existed. Bang. The gavel hit the wood. All assets held by Rhodes Line Management, Harborview Heritage Trustees, and any associated shell entities are to be immediately repatriated to the Henry Gray estate. She looked at me, and as the sole living descendant who qualifies under the charter, the sole beneficiary of that estate is Freya Turner. The room exploded with noise, but I did not hear it. I only heard the pounding of my own heart. Judge Holt wasn't finished. Bailiff, secure the defendant. I am referring this entire record to the district attorney's office with a recommendation for immediate indictment on charges of grand larceny, forgery, wire fraud, and witness intimidation. The asset freeze is converted to a seizure order. Mr. Rhodes, you are not going to Aspen. You are going to County Holding. Two court officers moved toward Gavin. He tried to back away, stammering, but they took him by the arms. For the first time in 10 years, Gavin Rhodes was not in control. I sat there, frozen. Michael put his hand on my shoulder and squeezed. "We did it, Freya," he whispered. I reached into my pocket. I pulled out my plastic ID badge, the one that said Freya. Sanitation. It was scratched, dirty, and cheap. It was the badge that had gotten me into the building to find the charter. It was the badge that proved I existed. I placed it on the polished mahogany table, right next to the verdict sheet. I stood up. I looked at Gavin as they handcuffed him. He looked at me, his eyes wide with shock. "I am not a ghost. Gavin," I said softly, "I am the landlord." At that exact moment, 60 miles away in Riverbridge, the morning commute was in full swing. Thousands of people were rushing through the concourse, their eyes glued to their phones or the floor. But then, the main board changed. The giant LED screen, the one that usually listed delays and cancellations, went black for a second. Then, it flickered to life with a new image. It was the old logo of Gray Rail and Freight, the iron wheel and the wing, but underneath it, the text was new. The Henry Gray Foundation for those who show up, and below that, in letters 10 feet high, administered by Freya Turner. On the floor of Sector B, a woman pushing a mop bucket stopped. She looked up. Her name was Maria. She had worked with me for 6 months. She knew I slept on the bench. She knew I ate crackers for dinner. She stared at the screen. She stared at the name. Her mouth fell open. Other cleaners stopped. Frank, the security guard, stepped out of his booth. He looked at the board. Then he took off his cap and smiled. "Freya," he whispered. "Well, I will be damned." The commuters stopped too. They looked up at the bright screen, wondering who Freya Turner was. They didn't know she was the girl they had stepped over yesterday, but they would know now. I walked out of the courthouse into the crisp Harborview air. The wind was cold, blowing off the ocean, but for the first time in 11 years, it didn't hurt. It felt clean. Reporters were shouting my name. Cameras were flashing, but I kept walking. Michael walked beside me, shielding me from the microphones. I closed my eyes for a second. In my head, I could hear the announcement chime of the Riverbridge station. Ding dong. Now arriving on track 1. It wasn't a train. It was me. I had finally arrived. I opened my eyes and hailed a cab. I had a train station to run, and the first thing I was going to do was give the night shift a raise. The departure board was finally calling my name, and this time, I wasn't just a passenger. I was the one driving the engine. Thank you so much for listening to Freya's story of struggle and vindication. I would love to know where you are tuning in from. Are you listening on your commute, at work, or maybe relaxing at home? Please leave a comment below to share your thoughts on Gavin's downfall. And don't forget to subscribe to the Maya Revenge Stories channel, like this video, and hit that hype button so we can share more stories of justice with the world.